My son-in-law accidentally sent me my daughter's lunchbox. What I found totally shocked me. The first document was a quitclaim deed. I knew enough about real estate from my late husband's work to recognize the form. Claire's signature was at the bottom, notarized and dated March 29, transferring complete ownership of their Charlotte home to David Hayes only. Not joint ownership. Not shared property. Everything to him, nothing to her. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were planning your destruction? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I opened the lunchbox expecting apple slices. Instead, I found my daughter's signature on papers that made my blood run cold. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to steal from the person they promised to love, this story will shake you to your core. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were planning your destruction? Has something like this happened in your family, where the person closest to you becomes your biggest threat? What I'm about to share with you happened right here in North Carolina, where family bonds run deep, but some people will cross any line for money and control. This isn't just about fraud, it's about how predators hide behind wedding rings and law degrees while their victims lie helpless in hospital beds. Follow along as we uncover evidence that was never meant to be found, and watch as one mother's accidental discovery brings down a carefully planned scheme that took years to build. If you found proof someone was stealing from your child while they were helpless, would you confront them immediately, or gather more evidence first? This choice could save or destroy everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when mothers fight back. My name is Margaret Morrison, and I've lived in Raleigh, North Carolina for 37 years. I raised 2 kids in a house with a creaky front porch and yellow kitchen walls that have seen more family meals than I can count. I thought I knew what trouble looked like until that Tuesday afternoon when my son-in-law dropped off the wrong lunchbox. It was one of those spring days where the air smells like fresh mulch and possibility. Claire had been in and out of Chapel Hill Hospital for weeks with complications from her pregnancy, and her husband David had been playing the devoted spouse, bringing me updates, handling her mail, taking care of what he called all the paperwork stuff. I was folding Claire's laundry when David knocked. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, briefcase in one hand and a small blue lunchbox in the other. "Mrs. Morrison, I accidentally grabbed Claire's hospital bag instead of my lunch," he said, setting the box on my kitchen counter. "Mind if I swap them out real quick?" "Of course, honey. How's she doing today?" "Better. Much better. The doctors think she can come home this weekend." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but I figured that was exhaustion. Taking care of someone sick wears you down to nothing. He headed to the guest room where Claire's things were stored, and I went back to folding her favorite blue sweater, the one she wore to church every Sunday. That's when curiosity got the better of me. The lunchbox wasn't latched properly. When I lifted it to close it correctly, the lid popped open. No apple slices. No crackers or juice box. Instead, there was a manila folder with Claire Morrison Hayes, confidential, typed across the front. My hand started shaking before I even opened it. The first document was a quitclaim deed. I knew enough about real estate from my late husband's work to recognize the form. Claire's signature was at the bottom, notarized and dated March 29. Transferring complete ownership of their Charlotte home to David Hayes only. Not joint ownership. Not shared property. Everything to him, nothing to her. But something felt wrong about that signature. It looked shaky, uncertain. Nothing like Claire's usual confident handwriting. The second document made my knees weak. It was a scanned copy of the same deed, but this one had computer properties visible in the margins. Created, March 15th, modified, March 15th, printed, March 28th. March 15th. 2 full weeks before Claire supposedly signed it. March 29th was the day she was so heavily sedated she couldn't even remember the nurses' names. I heard David's footsteps coming back down the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it from the next room. I closed the folder, latched the lunchbox, and set it exactly where he'd left it. "Found it," he called out cheerfully, walking back into the kitchen with his actual lunch bag. "Thanks for letting me dig around in there." "No problem at all," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. He picked up the blue lunchbox, and I watched him walk to his car like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just accidentally handed me proof that he was stealing my daughter's home while she was too sick to fight back. But it wasn't just the signature that made me freeze, it was the computer metadata showing the document was created weeks before Claire supposedly signed it. Screenshot that date discrepancy. You'll need it later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Claire's shaky signature and those dates that didn't match. By 3 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with a notepad, writing down everything I could remember about the past few weeks. David handling all of Claire's mail. David saying she was too tired for visitors on days when I called. David mentioning how confused she'd been lately, even before the pregnancy complications started. The next morning, I drove to Claire's house in Charlotte. I still had a key from when she asked me to water her plants last month. The house felt cold and empty, like nobody had been living there for weeks. I went straight to Claire's home office, the small room where she kept all her important papers organized in color-coded files. Her system was always perfect. Everything labeled, everything in its place. But now, half the files were missing. The ones that remained told a story I didn't want to believe. Bank statements showed automatic transfers from Claire's personal account to a joint account, then immediate withdrawals that left her individual savings nearly empty. Her retirement account statements were missing entirely, but there were empty envelopes marked 401k, urgent, scattered in the wastepaper basket. In the back of her desk drawer, I found something that made my stomach turn. A practice sheet, David's handwriting copying Claire's signature over and over again. Claire Hayes. C. Hayes. Claire Morrison Hayes. 20 different versions, getting cleaner and more confident with each attempt. The last page had a note in his handwriting: hospital visit March 29th, bring notary forms. March 29th. The same date on the deed. I took pictures of everything with my phone, careful to capture the handwriting practice and the dates on all the bank statements. Then I put everything back exactly how I found it. On my way home, I stopped at the hospital in Chapel Hill. I told the front desk I was Claire's mother and needed to check on her visitor logs for insurance purposes. The volunteer was sweet and helpful. She pulled up Claire's records and printed out the daily summary sheets. March 29th, patient heavily sedated. No visitors recorded. Pain medication administered 2 p.m., 6 p.m., 10 p.m. Patient responsive but drowsy. The notary's signature on the deed was time-stamped 3:15 p.m., exactly when my daughter was unconscious from pain medication. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at the visitor log, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about erasing my daughter while she was too weak to know it was happening. The metadata didn't lie. Created, March 15th, Claire's supposed signature date, March 29th. 2 weeks in between. But if he could forge one signature, how many others were there? Ever discovered someone you trusted was living a lie? The Durham County Clerk's office smells like old paper and fresh coffee. I'd never been inside a government building for anything more serious than renewing my driver's license, but here I was at 8 a.m. sharp, waiting for them to open so I could chase down a lie. The clerk behind the counter was a middle-aged woman named Patricia with kind eyes and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. When I explained that I needed to verify some notary records for my daughter's documents, she didn't ask many questions. "What's the notary's name and commission number?" she asked, pulling up her computer system. I read the information from the deed David had accidentally left in that lunchbox. Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard, then stopped. She frowned at her screen. "That's odd. This commission number belongs to Robert Chin, but he reported his notary seal stolen 6 months ago. We issued him a new one." My heart started racing. Stolen? Yes, and look at this. She turned her monitor so I could see. The address listed for the notarization doesn't match any of the addresses on file for Mr. Chen's authorized locations. The address on Claire's deed led to a small office building on the outskirts of Durham. Patricia helped me cross-reference it with business registrations, and what we found made my mouth go dry. The building had been empty since January. No tenants, no businesses, no notary services. Mrs. Morrison, I think you need to file a complaint with the Secretary of State's office, Patricia said quietly. This looks like notary fraud. But I wasn't done yet. Can you help me check hospital visitor policies for notarizations? Another search, another terrible discovery. Chapel Hill Hospital had strict policies about legal documents. Any notarization of incapacitated patients required family witnesses, medical clearance, and administrative approval. None of that had happened for Claire. Patricia printed everything: the stolen notary reports, the empty building records, the hospital policies. She put it all in a manila folder and handed it to me like she was passing along evidence in a criminal case. Your daughter's lucky to have you watching out for her, she said. On my drive home, I stopped at the empty office building. It was a squat brick structure with "For Lease" signs in every window. The parking lot was cracked and full of weeds. No notary had worked there. No legitimate business had operated from that address in months. But someone had used it as a fake location for stealing my daughter's home. Claire's medical records showed she was sedated March 29th. The notary's log showed she was alert and responsive. The notary's address led to an empty office building. But the signature matched perfectly, too perfectly. When the evidence is this clean, something's wrong. What would you investigate next? I found Dr. Elizabeth Warren through the North Carolina Bar Association's list of certified forensic document examiners. Her office was in a converted house near downtown Charlotte, with microscopes and magnifying equipment that looked like something from a crime lab. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand that handwriting analysis isn't magic, she said, adjusting her glasses as she examined the deed. But when someone tries to forge a signature, they usually leave traces. She placed Claire's supposed signature under a high-powered microscope and immediately made a small sound that got my attention. What do you see? I asked. Hesitation marks. See these tiny dots and wavers? That's not natural writing flow. That's someone tracing very carefully over something else. She adjusted the focus. And look here, there are actually 2 layers of ink. Someone wrote this signature twice. She pulled out a folder of other documents I'd brought, Claire's Christmas cards, grocery lists, anything with her real handwriting. Under the microscope, the differences were obvious. Your daughter has a very confident writing style. She connects her letters smoothly and applies consistent pressure. This forged signature shows multiple pressure changes and unnatural pen lifts. Someone was working very hard to copy something they'd practiced. Dr. Warren took detailed photographs and measurements. She showed me how forgers often trace over legitimate signatures using light tables or carbon transfer methods. The result looks convincing to most people, but microscopic analysis reveals the truth. This isn't Claire's natural hand, she said finally. Someone traced over a legitimate signature, probably multiple times to get it right. Will this hold up in court? Absolutely. I'll prepare a full forensic report with photographic evidence and technical analysis. But Mrs. Morrison, you'll need more than handwriting evidence to build a strong case. She handed me a manila envelope. This contains my preliminary findings and a letter stating my expert opinion. The full report will take another week. As I was leaving, Dr. Warren said something that stayed with me: document fraud usually isn't a one-time crime. If someone forged this signature, they've probably forged others. You might want to check all of your daughter's recent legal documents. Driving home, I thought about David's practice sheets in Claire's desk drawer. All those attempts at copying her signature. The careful handwriting exercises getting cleaner and more confident. One signature can steal a lifetime of work. Subscribe to learn how predators hide in plain sight. That evening, I called the hospital and asked to speak with Claire's primary nurse from March 29th. Her name was Jennifer, and she remembered that day clearly. Your daughter couldn't even hold a cup of water steady, Jennifer told me. She was on heavy pain medication and kept drifting in and out of consciousness. No way she could have signed legal documents. She handed me a second opinion letter. This will hold up in court, she said. But you'll need more than handwriting. Forensic evidence versus family loyalty, which wins in court? I needed someone who could testify about Claire's condition on March 29th. Someone with medical training who couldn't be dismissed as a biased family member. That's how I found myself sitting across from Nurse Patricia Williams at a small coffee shop near Chapel Hill Hospital. Patricia had worked the medical floor for 15 years. She remembered Claire because of how worried she'd been about her patient's vulnerability during those difficult weeks. Your daughter was in rough shape, Patricia said, stirring cream into her coffee. The pregnancy complications were serious, and we had her on strong pain medications around the clock. Some days she couldn't even remember what she'd eaten for breakfast. I showed her the deed with Claire's signature dated March 29th. Patricia studied it carefully, then shook her head. Mrs. Morrison, honey, was barely conscious that week. Couldn't even sign her own breakfast menu. The nurses had to help her hold a pen just to mark an X for meal preferences. You're absolutely certain? I documented everything in her medical chart. March 29th was one of her worst days. She was on morphine for pain and sedatives for anxiety. Hospital policy requires patients to be alert and oriented before signing any documents, especially legal ones. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed me photos she'd taken of Claire's daily medication schedule, something she did for all her patients to track their progress. See these timestamps? March 29th shows pain medication administered at 2 p.m., 6 p.m., and 10 p.m. Between doses, she was either sleeping or too drowsy to focus on anything. The notary had supposedly witnessed Claire's signature at 3:15 p.m., exactly 1 hour after her afternoon pain medication. Patricia, would you be willing to testify about Claire's condition if this goes to court? She didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I've seen family members take advantage of sick patients before. It makes me sick every time. Your daughter deserves someone fighting for her. Before I left, Patricia gave me copies of Claire's medication logs and her own nursing notes from that week. Everything was documented in careful medical handwriting: times, dosages, patient responses. Mrs. Morrison, there's something else you should know. That man, Claire's husband, he asked me about power of attorney forms during her second week. Wanted to know what it would take for Claire to sign legal documents while she was hospitalized. My blood went cold. What did you tell him? I told him she wasn't competent to sign anything important. Suggested he wait until she recovered. He didn't like that answer. Patricia remembered the conversation clearly because David had pushed back, asking about exceptions and special circumstances. When she explained hospital policy about patient advocacy and family witnesses, he'd gotten quiet and changed the subject. He asked about power of attorney forms, Patricia said quietly. I told him she wasn't competent to sign anything. Healthcare workers see everything. What red flags have you missed? I'd never hired an attorney in my life, but Dr. Warren had recommended someone who specialized in elder abuse and document fraud. James Mitchell's office was in downtown Durham, in one of those old brick buildings that made you feel like serious business happened there. Mr. Mitchell was younger than I expected, but when he reviewed my evidence folder, his expression grew darker with each document. Mrs. Morrison, this isn't just fraud, he said, spreading the papers across his conference table. This is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, using your daughter's medical condition to steal her assets. He explained how North Carolina law protected people who couldn't defend themselves. Claire's hospital records proved she was incapacitated. The forged notarization proved intent to deceive. The practice signatures proved premeditation. The criminal elements here are serious. Forgery, fraud, exploitation of a disabled person. These are felony charges. What about getting Claire's house back? That's the civil side. We'll file to void the fraudulent deed and restore Claire's ownership. But first, We need to preserve all the evidence and prevent him from hiding or transferring any other assets. Mr. Mitchell walked me through the legal strategy. Step 1. Emergency preservation order to freeze all property transfers involving Claire. Step 2. Formal complaint to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Step 3. Civil lawsuit to recover damages and restore her property rights. The key is moving quickly but quietly. If David realizes we're onto him, he might try to cover his tracks or create more fraudulent documents. Legal predators count on families staying quiet. Subscribe. Silence only protects the guilty. Mr. Mitchell pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. I need you to gather every document you can find, bank statements, insurance papers, anything David might have had access to while Claire was sick. And we need to document Claire's current mental state to show she's recovered and competent to testify. How long will this take? The preservation order can be filed tomorrow. Criminal charges depend on the district attorney's office, but with this much evidence, I expect they'll move fast. The civil case could take months, but David will likely settle once the criminal charges hit. Before I left, Mr. Mitchell gave me homework. Create a detailed timeline of every suspicious incident, every time David handled Claire's paperwork, every red flag I'd noticed but dismissed. Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses. In court, details matter more than emotions. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every moment I could remember. David volunteering to handle Claire's mail. David saying she was too confused for visitors. David mentioning how he was protecting her from financial stress. All the signs had been there. I just hadn't recognized them as warning signs until that lunchbox opened my eyes. We'll file quietly, he said. Let him think he's safe while we build the case. Go loud or stay quiet, which strategy wins legal battles? Mr. Mitchell's homework assignment led me back to Claire's house, this time with a specific mission: find her original will and any other legal documents David might have managed during her illness. Claire had always been organized about important papers. She kept everything in a fireproof safe in her bedroom closet: birth certificates, insurance policies, the deed to her house. At least, that's where everything used to be. The safe was still there, but when I opened it with the combination Claire had given me years ago, half the documents were missing. What remained told a story of systematic theft. Claire's original will was still there, the one she'd written 3 years ago when she bought the house. It clearly stated that in case of death or incapacity, everything should go to me as trustee for any future children, with David receiving only personal items and a modest cash amount. This wasn't the will of someone planning to sign away her house. But there were other documents I'd never seen before. A life insurance policy where the beneficiary had been changed from Margaret Morrison, mother, to David Hayes, spouse. With Claire's forged signature dated during her hospital stay. A power of attorney document giving David complete control over Claire's finances, also signed during her hospital stay, also clearly forged. Bank records showed systematic transfers from Claire's accounts to accounts I didn't recognize. Her retirement fund had been liquidated entirely, with David listed as the authorized person to make the transaction. The most damaging evidence was tucked behind Claire's birth certificate, a copy of David's law firm letterhead with handwritten notes in his writing. Will amendment, March 15th. POA forms, March 20th. Deed transfer, March 29th. Insurance change, April 2nd. A timeline of theft, written in the thief's own hand. I photographed everything, careful to capture the dates and signatures. Then I noticed something that made my hands shake. David's law firm had a safe deposit box key taped inside the folder. The bank records showed Claire had never opened a safe deposit box. But David had opened one in her name, using forged power of attorney documents, 2 weeks after she entered the hospital. What was he hiding in a box that didn't officially exist? The next morning, I drove to the bank with Claire's identification and the forged power of attorney documents. The bank manager was helpful but confused. Mrs. Hayes's box was closed last week, she said, checking her computer. Mr. Hayes came in with legal documents showing she'd passed away. But Claire wasn't dead. She was home, recovering, completely unaware that her husband had legally erased her from her own life. Claire's original will was in her safe deposit box, the one he claimed didn't exist. The bank records showed his last visit was the day before Claire's surgery. He knew exactly what was in there. What would you hide in a safe deposit box that no one could find? Mr. Mitchell filed the emergency preservation order at 8 a.m. on a Thursday morning. By 10 a.m., we had our answer. Granted, the court clerk said, handing me the official order. All property transfers involving Claire Morrison Hayes are frozen pending investigation. The order was comprehensive. David couldn't sell the house, couldn't access the joint accounts, couldn't make any changes to insurance policies or retirement funds. Every asset connected to Claire was now under court protection. How long before he finds out? I asked Mr. Mitchell. The process server will deliver notice by noon. After that, he'll know we're on to him. I spent the morning preparing for David's reaction. Mr. Mitchell had warned me to expect phone calls, maybe even a visit. David would likely try to convince me this was all a misunderstanding, or claim he was protecting Claire from financial stress. Don't engage, Mr. Mitchell advised. Let him talk, but don't agree to anything. Everything he says now could be used as evidence later. The preservation order also required David to produce all documents related to Claire's finances, every bank record, every legal document, every piece of paper he'd signed on her behalf. He had 5 business days to comply. But the real victory was what the order prevented. David couldn't hide assets, couldn't create more forged documents, couldn't transfer money to offshore accounts or relatives. His theft operation was officially shut down. Legal predators count on families staying quiet. Subscribe, silence only protects the guilty. At 11:30 a.m., my phone started ringing. I let the first call go to voicemail. Then the second. By the third call, I could see David's number lighting up my screen every few minutes. The voicemail started polite but confused. Mrs. Morrison, I got some legal papers I don't understand. Can you call me back? Then concerned, I think there's been some kind of mistake with Claire's accounts. We need to talk. Then slightly panicked. The bank is saying I can't access our joint accounts. What's going on? I documented every call, every message, every time he tried to reach me. Mr. Mitchell had explained that desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes become evidence. At 2 p.m., the process server called to confirm delivery. David had been served at his law office, in front of his colleagues and clients. The preservation order was now official and public record. That's when the real pressure started. My doorbell rang at 3 p.m. David stood on my front porch, still in his business suit, holding the court papers and looking like a man whose perfect plan had just collapsed. Mrs. Morrison, we need to talk. The process server would reach him by noon. His perfect plan was about to become public record. Ever watched someone's lies catch up with them in real time? David stood on my front porch for 20 minutes, knocking and calling my name through the door. I watched him through the kitchen window, taking pictures of his increasingly agitated behavior with my phone. He called 17 times that afternoon. I let every single call go to voicemail. The messages told the story of a man watching his carefully constructed lies fall apart in real time. First confusion, Mrs. Morrison, there's been some terrible misunderstanding about Claire's finances. Then false concern, I'm worried about Claire's mental state. These legal papers are going to upset her recovery. Then veiled threats, this is hurting Claire more than helping her. We need to resolve this quietly, as family. Finally, barely controlled anger, you're making a serious mistake. Claire trusted me to handle these matters. You're interfering with legal documents you don't understand. I saved every voicemail, forwarded them to Mr. Mitchell, and wrote down the exact times of each call. Harassment documentation, he called it. Evidence that David was trying to intimidate me into dropping the case. The final voicemail came at 8 p.m. This one was different, calmer, more calculated. with the smooth attorney voice I'd heard him use in public. "Mrs. Morrison, I know you think you're protecting Claire, but you're actually putting her in legal jeopardy. These documents were all properly executed with Claire's full knowledge and consent. If you continue with this frivolous lawsuit, Claire could face serious financial consequences. We need to discuss Claire's best interests before this gets out of hand." That message made my blood run cold. It wasn't just manipulation, it was a threat wrapped in legal language. David was telling me that if I didn't back down, he'd find ways to hurt Claire financially. I called Mr. Mitchell immediately. "He's getting desperate," Mr. Mitchell said after I played him the voicemails. "That last message sounds like witness intimidation. Save everything, don't respond to any of his calls, and definitely don't meet with him alone. Bullies expect you to react. Subscribe to learn when silence becomes your strongest weapon." But David wasn't done. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside was a letter on his law firm's letterhead, professionally typed and signed. "Dear Mrs. Morrison," it began. "I understand your concerns about Claire's legal documents, but I must inform you that all actions taken were with her full knowledge and consent. The preservation order is causing significant financial hardship for Claire, and continuing this matter could result in substantial legal costs that will ultimately come from her assets." The letter went on to suggest that I was being manipulated by opportunistic attorneys, who were using family concerns to generate legal fees. It offered to resolve this matter amicably if I would agree to drop all legal actions within 48 hours. It was polished, professional, and completely manipulative. The final voicemail was different, calmer, calculated. "We need to discuss Claire's best interests. When predators get caught, they always claim to protect their victims. Recognize the pattern?" The letter demanding I drop the case within 48 hours was David's biggest mistake. It proved he knew the documents were fraudulent, otherwise, why would he be so desperate to avoid court review? But it also told me something important. David believed he could still manipulate me, still convince me to protect him instead of Claire. That arrogance gave me an idea. North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal. Mr. Mitchell had mentioned this when explaining how to document harassment. I called David back. "I got your letter," I said when he answered. "Maybe we should talk in person. I don't want this to hurt Claire." The relief in his voice was obvious. "Mrs. Morrison, I knew you'd see reason. Can I come over tonight? We can work this out as family." That evening, I set up my phone to record and placed it on the kitchen table under a stack of napkins. When David arrived, he looked confident again, back in control of the situation. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "This whole thing has been a misunderstanding. Help me understand, then. These documents with Claire's signature." "I did what was best for Claire," he interrupted. "She was sick, scared, worried about money. I handled the paperwork so she wouldn't have to stress about it. But the dates don't match up with when she was able to sign things." David leaned forward, his voice taking on that smooth attorney tone. "Mrs. Morrison, Claire signed those documents when she was lucid. The hospital records don't tell the whole story. There were moments when she was alert and worried about protecting our assets. The notary records show. The notary is a friend of mine. He was flexible about meeting us at the hospital during Claire's better moments." My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. "So Claire did sign them herself?" "Of course she did. I would never forge my wife's signature." He smiled. "Though I'll admit, I may have guided her hand a bit when she was shaky from the medication. Just to help her write clearly." There it was. Admission that he'd manipulated her signature while she was medicated. But David wasn't done confessing. "Look, the deed transfer was just practical planning. If something happened to Claire, I needed to be able to handle the house without probate complications. She would have signed it anyway once she understood the benefits." "She would have signed it anyway," he said. The recording device caught every word. And the insurance policy changes? Same thing. Practical planning. Claire was too sick to focus on details, so I made the smart decisions for both of us. Everything I did protected our family's interests. Sometimes the truth comes out when predators think they're safe. What's your recording story? The recording was 18 minutes of David confessing to fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. Mr. Mitchell listened to it twice, taking notes on every admission. This is a prosecutor's dream, he said, leaning back in his chair. He just handed us a complete confession. Within 3 days, we had an appointment with the Durham County District Attorney's Office. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chin specialized in financial crimes against vulnerable adults. When she heard the recording, her expression grew serious. Mrs. Morrison, what your son-in-law did isn't just civil fraud. These are serious felony charges. She explained how North Carolina law protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Forging signatures while someone was medically incapacitated was a Class H felony. Financial exploitation of a disabled adult carried additional penalties. Each fraudulent document was a separate charge. The recording proves intent and premeditation. He admitted to forging her signature, manipulating her while she was medicated, and making decisions without her consent. The DA's investigator took one look at the evidence and reached for his handcuffs. But Sarah warned me that family cases could be complicated. Juries sometimes struggled with charges between spouses, even when the evidence was clear. Defense attorneys will argue that married couples make financial decisions together, that David was just helping Claire manage paperwork during a difficult time. But the hospital records show she wasn't capable of making decisions. Exactly. That's what makes this criminal rather than just a civil dispute. Sarah walked me through what would happen next. A grand jury would review the evidence and decide whether to indict David on criminal charges. If indicted, he'd face arrest, booking, and formal charges that could result in prison time. How long does that take? With evidence this strong? Probably 2 weeks for the grand jury, then immediate arrest if they vote to indict. Justice delayed is justice denied. Subscribe, you'll want to see how this ends. That afternoon, Sarah's investigator called David's law office to schedule an interview. I wasn't there, but Mr. Mitchell told me later that David initially agreed to cooperate, then called back an hour later with his own criminal defense attorney. That tells us he knows he's in serious legal trouble, Mr. Mitchell explained. The grand jury met on a Tuesday morning. Sarah presented our evidence, the forged signatures, the hospital records, the practice sheets, and most damaging of all, David's recorded confession. They voted to indict that afternoon. The charges were serious. 3 counts of forgery, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a disabled adult, 1 count of identity theft, and 1 count of notary fraud. Each carried potential prison time. The arrest warrant will be executed tomorrow morning, Sarah told me over the phone. We're coordinating with his law firm to minimize disruption, but he'll be taken into custody. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt satisfied that David would finally face consequences for what he'd done to Claire. But another part of me worried about how this would affect my daughter when she learned the truth. Felony charges, the prosecutor said. He's looking at 2 to 5 years if convicted. Should family crimes carry the same penalties as stranger crimes? The arrest happened at 9:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. David was in a client meeting at his law firm when the Durham County Sheriff's deputies walked into the conference room. I wasn't there, but his law partner called me that afternoon. The conversation was awkward and brief. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that the firm had no knowledge of David's personal legal issues. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. By Thursday morning, David's law license was under emergency review. The North Carolina State Bar moved quickly when attorneys were charged with criminal fraud. His cases were being transferred to other lawyers, his clients were being notified, and his partnership was being dissolved. The arrest warrant was served at his law office. His partners learned about the charges from the court clerk, not him. I felt strange driving past the law firm where David had worked for 8 years. There were no news trucks or crowds, just the quiet professional embarrassment of a respected attorney being led away in handcuffs. But the legal system moves slowly, and David posted bond that same afternoon. He was back on the street within 6 hours, though his professional life was effectively over. The local newspaper picked up the story Friday morning. Local attorney charged with defrauding incapacitated wife. The article was factual but devastating. It detailed the charges, mentioned Claire's hospital stay, and quoted the district attorney about protecting vulnerable adults. David's picture was in the paper, his law firm headshot next to the words, "charged with felony fraud." I wondered how Claire would react when she saw it. She'd been getting stronger every day, asking more questions about why David seemed so stressed lately. I'd been protecting her from the legal details, but the newspaper would make that impossible. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Claire. "Mom, someone from the hospital called. They said David was arrested." "What's happening?" I'd been dreading this conversation for weeks. "How do you tell your daughter that the man she married was stealing from her while she was too sick to know?" "Honey, we need to talk. Can I come over?" Claire was waiting on her front porch when I arrived. She looked stronger than she had in months, but her eyes were full of questions and fear. I handed her the newspaper article. She read it slowly, her face going pale. "Mom, this can't be right. David wouldn't, he was taking care of everything while I was sick." "That's what we need to talk about, sweetheart." I showed her copies of the forged signatures, the practice sheets from her desk drawer, the hospital records proving she was unconscious when she supposedly signed legal documents. Claire studied each piece of evidence carefully. She was an intelligent woman who'd just been physically weakened by illness. Once she saw the proof, she understood immediately. He stole from me while I was in the hospital. His law license suspension hearing was scheduled for Friday. Claire was finally strong enough to testify. When the truth comes out, how fast does a reputation crumble? Claire insisted on testifying at David's preliminary hearing. Against my advice and Mr. Mitchell's concerns, she wanted to face him in court. "Mom, I need to do this. He stole my voice when I was too sick to speak. Now I can speak for myself." The Durham County Courthouse was busier than I expected. David's case had attracted attention from other attorneys, and the gallery was half full when we arrived. David sat at the defendant's table with his criminal defense attorney, wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to family dinners. He looked smaller somehow, less confident than the man who'd stood on my porch demanding I drop the case. When Claire walked into the courtroom, David's shoulders sagged. He hadn't seen her since his arrest, and she looked stronger and more determined than he probably remembered. The prosecutor called Claire as the state's first witness. "Ms. Hayes, can you tell the court about your condition during March of this year?" Claire's voice was clear and steady. "I was hospitalized for pregnancy complications and severe illness. I was on heavy pain medication and sedatives. Most days, I couldn't stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time. Do you recall signing any legal documents on March 29th? "I never signed that document," Claire said clearly into the microphone. "I couldn't even hold a pen that day." The prosecutor showed Claire the forged deed. "Is this your signature?" Claire examined it carefully. "It looks like my signature, but it's not how I write when I'm healthy. This looks shaky and uncertain. I was too medicated to write anything on March 29th. David's attorney objected to Claire's medical assessment, but the prosecutor had hospital records to back up every statement. Medication logs, nursing notes, physician orders, all proving Claire was incapacitated when she supposedly signed away her home. "Ms. Hayes, did you ever authorize your husband to sign legal documents on your behalf?" "Never. I specifically told him I wanted to wait until I was better to handle any paperwork. I didn't want to make important decisions while I was sick." The most powerful moment came when the prosecutor played David's recorded confession from my kitchen table. The courtroom was silent as David's voice filled the room, admitting to guiding Claire's hand while she was medicated, admitting he made decisions without her consent. Claire listened with tears in her eyes, but her voice never wavered during cross-examination. David's attorney tried to argue that married couples often help each other with paperwork, that David was just trying to protect their assets during a difficult time. "Sir, there's a difference between helping someone and forging their signature while they're unconscious," Claire replied. "I trusted him to take care of me, not to steal from me." Victims' voices matter most. Subscribe if you believe the truth always surfaces. After 2 hours of testimony, the judge ruled there was probable cause for all charges to proceed to trial. David would remain free on bond, but he couldn't contact Claire or access any of her accounts. The jury deliberated for 18 minutes. The verdict was unanimous. What's the fastest guilty verdict you've ever heard of? David's trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own recorded confession made the prosecutor's case almost effortless. The jury found him guilty on all counts: forgery, financial exploitation, identity theft, and notary fraud. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, giving David time to arrange his affairs before prison. But the real victory came during the restitution hearing. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over financial crime cases for 20 years. She'd seen every kind of theft and fraud, but family cases seemed to affect her more deeply. "Mr. Hayes, you violated the most basic trust, the promise to protect someone you claimed to love during their most vulnerable time." The judge ordered full restitution plus punitive damages. David had to return the house to Claire's name, restore all insurance beneficiaries to their original status, and pay back every dollar he'd stolen from her accounts. But the judge wasn't finished. Financial predators must face real consequences. The sentence is 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. David's face went pale. His attorney had argued for community service and probation, claiming this was an aberration caused by financial stress and Claire's illness. The judge disagreed. "This wasn't a moment of weakness, Mr. Hayes. This was a calculated campaign to erase your wife's legal identity while she was helpless. The evidence shows months of planning and systematic theft." The restitution order was detailed and comprehensive. David had 30 days to transfer the house back to Claire's name, restore her insurance policies, and provide accounting for every dollar he'd taken. If he failed to comply, additional criminal charges would be filed. Furthermore, Mr. Hayes will pay all court costs and attorney fees associated with both the criminal prosecution and the civil recovery. What does justice look like when families protect each other? After the sentencing, Claire and I walked out of the courthouse together. The afternoon sun felt warm on our faces, and for the first time in months, Claire looked truly peaceful. "Mom, thank you for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We protect our children, no matter how old they get." David served his full sentence. The law firm dissolved, and his license to practice law was permanently revoked. He lost everything he tried to steal, plus his freedom and professional reputation. Claire recovered fully from her illness and eventually filed for divorce. The court granted her petition without opposition. David didn't contest anything after his criminal conviction. The house was restored to Claire's name within 2 weeks of sentencing. She changed all the locks the day the deed was filed. But the real victory was watching Claire sign her name, strong and clear, on the restored deed. The judge ordered full restitution plus punitive damages. Financial predators must face real consequences. 6 months later, Claire moved back to her own home. The lunchbox sits on her kitchen counter, a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing. I visit Claire every Sunday now. We have dinner together, and sometimes we talk about what happened, but mostly we focus on moving forward. She's building a new life, one that belongs entirely to her. The blue lunchbox has become something of a family symbol. Claire keeps it on her counter filled with fresh fruit, and whenever her friends ask about it, she tells them it's the lunchbox that saved her life. If Mom hadn't opened it by accident, I might never have known what David was doing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if David hadn't made that simple mistake. If he'd grabbed the right lunch bag that Tuesday afternoon, his theft might have continued unnoticed until Claire's assets were completely gone. But truth has a way of revealing itself, even when people try to bury it under legal documents and false signatures. Claire returned to work part-time at the library where she'd worked before her illness. Her co-workers welcomed her back with flowers and homemade cards. They'd followed the case in the newspaper and were proud of her courage in testifying. "Mrs. Morrison, your daughter is inspiring," one of them told me. "She showed that victims don't have to stay silent." The criminal justice system worked exactly as it should have. David served his full sentence and was released to supervised probation. He moved to another state and found work in a non-legal field. We heard through mutual friends that he never remarried. Claire eventually started dating again. She met someone at the library, a gentleman who respected her independence and never asked to handle her paperwork. When they got engaged last month, Claire insisted on keeping her finances completely separate. "I learned the hard way that trusting someone doesn't mean giving them control over your life," she told me. The legal changes we fought for had broader impact too. The hospital updated its policies about protecting vulnerable patients from financial exploitation. The county clerk's office improved verification procedures for notary fraud. Small changes that might protect other families from what we went through. Family protection never goes out of style. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. People ask me if I'm angry about what David did to our family. The honest answer is complicated. I'm angry that he hurt Claire, but I'm proud that we caught him. I'm sad that greed destroyed their marriage, but I'm grateful that Claire survived and recovered. Most of all, I'm reminded that protecting the people you love sometimes means trusting your instincts even when everyone else thinks you're being paranoid. That Tuesday afternoon when I opened the wrong lunchbox changed everything. It taught me that mothers never stop being mothers, regardless of how old their children get. When your child is in danger, you fight with everything you have. The lunchbox still sits on Claire's counter, filled with fresh apples and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest accidents reveal the biggest truths. What would you do if a lunchbox changed your family's life forever?